Professional editing is crucial for self-publishing authors. In this video, we're going to discuss the types of editing you should be considering as an indie author and how to find the best editor for you, your work, and your career. I'm Victoria Griffin, author and editor. Welcome back to the Self-Publishing Success series. In the last video, we discussed how to decide whether self-publishing is the best route for you and your career. In this video, we're going to talk about professional editing for indie authors. Of course, as a professional editor myself, I have worked with a ton of independent authors. I also own a company, Bluepen Publishing Services, which provides other services for independent authors, including cover design, interior formatting, etc. We'll be talking more about those types of services in future videos, but today we are focusing on my domain, and that is editing. Of course, professional editing is crucial for anyone who is self-publishing. When you publish through a traditional house, you have in-house editors who work with your manuscript and help bring it up to that professional quality. Many literary agents are also editorial and help you revise the manuscript before you even go on submission to publishing houses. But when you self-publish, you don't have the benefit of that support system. You forego that support in order to maintain all of the control over your work. So that means that you have to take care of your manuscript's editing needs yourself. And that also means that you have to be very honest with yourself about what your manuscript needs. If you've been working on it for a really long time, a professional editor you trust can help you identify your manuscript's needs and pursue the best types of editing for your manuscript. Of course, that requires you to find an editor that you trust, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So one of the basic principles of editing is that we always work high to low. We approach the high-level elements first. That's things like plot, structure, character. And then we move down the ladder down to the low-level elements. So after the big picture aspects are all in line and perfect and as good as we are going to make them, then we start looking at line elements, sentence and paragraph level changes. We start editing for concision, clarity, consistency, adherence to the style guide, and then finally for grammar and punctuation and those final checks to make sure that no errors remain in the document. This is the process we use for self-editing. It is also the process we use for professional editing. Why? Because you don't want to spend time and, in the case of a professional editor, money editing for these low-level elements only to go in and cut or rewrite big chunks of the manuscript. That said, when you're approaching a professional editor, typically the first thing you are going to look at is a high-level pass. The two main types of high-level passes are developmental editing and manuscript critiques. Now, the big difference between these two types of editing is the investment, time, energy, financial. Developmental editing requires a much larger investment than a manuscript critique. Of course, you also get a much larger return with a developmental edit. Now, as I am discussing these types of editing, note that terminology is not completely standard within the editing community, and each editor offers slightly different services with each type of editing. So moving forward, I'm going to be talking about what I do as a professional editor when I'm talking about the exact details of each type of editing. There can be some variation within this with different editors. It's not massive, but it's still worth clarifying with the editor you plan to work with exactly what they're going to do to your manuscript. Developmental editing is an in-depth process, and it involves really digging into that manuscript and looking at ways to make it better from a high-level perspective. It involves both in-text comments. So when I do a developmental edit, I read through the manuscript, leaving comments as I go, and then I write up an in-depth edit letter, a written analysis of the work. I go by each character and then look at areas including plot, structure, setting. Is the conflict on point? Are the stakes high enough? How is the structure? Is this the most effective way to tell this story? That's typically about 5 to 7 single-space pages, and then I spend an hour on a video or audio session with the author, discussing the notes, making sure that all the suggestions were clear, and talking about options for implementing the changes. And then the manuscript goes back to the author, and they put in the work and put all that feedback to good use. As you can tell, developmental editing is pretty involved. Depending on the manuscript, developmental edit may recommend light structural changes, cutting a scene or a chapter here or there, deepening some of the characterization, or it may involve a total rehaul of the manuscript. I have had both cases. I have had the same author come to me with different manuscripts, and one require only minor structural changes and one require basically a complete rewrite. And that's not to say that either manuscript is better than the other. It's just a matter of what needs to be done to make this manuscript the best that it can be from a high-level perspective. A manuscript critique, on the other hand, involves a read-through of the manuscript with no in-text comments, and then I write up an analysis that is less in-depth than the developmental edit letter. Typically, the critique is about 3 to 5 pages, and it really hits the high notes. The biggest difference between a developmental edit and a manuscript critique is that a manuscript critique is going to point out things that are wrong. The developmental edit is going to point out things that are wrong and then give you options for improving them, give you suggestions for fixing those issues, and overall just making the manuscript better, stronger. Of course, the other difference is price, because the developmental edit is far more comprehensive. It costs quite a bit more than a manuscript critique. A manuscript critique is also a great option if you're just not sure. If you're not sure where to start, what your manuscript needs, a lot of authors will begin with a manuscript critique to get an overall sense of their story, of where their manuscript is at and what it's probably going to need moving forward, and then they may move on to a developmental edit. After the developmental edit, I personally offer a reread service where I will go through and give basically a manuscript critique on the revised version of the manuscript, except it's heavily discounted since I've seen it once before. And then once all your high-level elements are in place, then it's time to start looking at low-level services. The 3 primary types of low-level editing are line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Again, you'll see a bit of variation about exactly how these are defined, but here is how I define them. Line editing involves editing for concision, clarity, consistency, and correctness. This is heavy editing. It also encompasses copy editing and proofreading, so I'm also fixing typos and style issues while line editing. However, because manuscripts that come to me for line editing typically require heavier editing, it's not likely that I'm going to catch all of those smaller minor errors during the line edit. Depending on the cleanness of the manuscript, a line edit can appear to be a moderate level edit, or it can look like a total rewrite just by changing the sentence structures, changing the word choice. Of course, the goal while doing this is always to maintain and highlight the author's voice while improving the overall readability. My opinion is that line editing is one of the most crucial stages, and I would recommend that all indie authors pursue line editing. The next type of low-level editing is copy editing. Copy editing involves editing for style issues. The standard style guide for fiction is the Chicago Manual of Style, and that is currently the CMOS 17. This is the latest edition. This is the one that we are currently basing our edits on. If you're writing fiction, I highly recommend getting yourself a copy of CMOS 17 or subscribing to the online version. So basically, copy editing is going to address anything that is in that book that is less than line editing but more than proofreading. Proofreading is a final check. Proofreading happens after the manuscript has already been through a round of either line edits or copy edits. It is clean. The only remaining changes that need to be made are to correct residual errors. Proofreading is going to fix typos, punctuation issues. Personally, if I get a manuscript from someone who is requesting proofreading, but the manuscript is clearly not ready for proofreading, I will not offer it. I instead ask them if they would be interested in line editing. So for independent authors, the 3 main types of editing I recommend are developmental editing, line editing, and proofreading. If you get those 3 passes, you can be certain that your manuscript is going to be vastly improved. Those are the options to go for to get the most bang for your buck. Now, many editors will offer discounts when you get multiple passes. Personally, I offer something called a full edit, which is those 3 types of editing plus a reread report. Again, to recap, I highly recommend developmental editing, which is going to help you revise and get your story where it needs to be. And then line editing, which is going to get your prose where it needs to be, up to a professional standard, and it's going to really improve the readability of your prose. And then proofreading to clean everything up, catch those residual errors, and make sure that the book you are publishing is error-free and spotless. Now that you know the types of editing you should be considering, how do you find the best editor for your work? How do you make sure the editor you're hiring is professional and reputable and knows what they're doing? Because it's hard. Handing your manuscript over to somebody, that's your baby. That's your heart and soul in there. And you want to know that the person you hand it to is going to treat it right. There are a ton of places to find editors, from social media to directories such as the EFA directory, referrals from other writers. You probably have no shortage of potential editors on your list. So once you start researching them, let's talk about a few of the things that you can look for in a potential editor. First of all, you can read their testimonials. Go on their website, check out their testimonials, see what other authors are saying about them. That is a quick quality check of the editor. Of course, if you got their name through a referral, talk to that writer, see what their process was like, and see if that's a process that sounds good to you. Every author is different, so once you work out exactly what you're looking for in an author-editor relationship, then make sure you're looking for that specifically. You should also look into the editor's specialties. Do they work with your genre, your age category? So personally, I work with adult and select YA. I would not be a good fit for a children's book, a middle grade book. If somebody approached me looking for editing for that, I would refer them to one of my colleagues. Also, make sure that the editor is familiar with your type of English. American English, British English, Canadian English, they all have different standards. So make sure your editor is comfortable working with the type of English that your manuscript is written in. This is really only important for line editing and proofreading. Developmental editing, this doesn't really come into play, but a lot of authors want to stick with the same editor throughout the process. So if that's the case, then make sure you know that up front. You can also check out the editor's credentials. They may have a degree in English, literature, or writing. They may have membership with an organization such as the EFA, the Editorial Freelancers Association. That's the one I belong to. It's the primary organization for US editors. Editors in Canada may belong to Editors Canada, and those in the UK often belong to the Society for Editors and Proofreaders. Basically, membership with a professional organization just says that the editor is invested in their career. Probably the quickest way to weed out an editor who is not reputable is by looking at their rates. Before you start approaching editors, you should understand industry standard rates. Somebody who is charging significantly below industry standard is probably not reputable. If you took your car to the shop and they said that they were going to charge $2 an hour to work on your car, you would probably take it somewhere else, right? It's the exact same thing with editing. Our rates are set based on what we are going to make per hour. So somebody who is charging significantly below industry standard is asking for very low hourly rates. So pay attention to that. The EFA has resources for understanding industry rates for different types of editing. I'm going to link in the description box a couple of resources that you can look at to start understanding industry standard rates. And the last thing you can consider when you are trying to decide whether the editor is right for you is a sample edit. Not all editors give sample edits. If they do not offer samples, it does not mean that they are not reputable. Also note that a sample edit really only applies to low-level editing. You can't very well give a sample of a developmental edit. So really, with developmental editing, it's kind of just having that conversation, that email correspondence with the editor, and trying to parse out whether you are a good fit, whether that editor is going to help you bring your manuscript in line with your vision. That's the goal. That's the main goal with developmental editing. Phew, okay. These are really just the basics. There is so much more to talk about when it comes to editing for indie authors, but this is what you need to know moving forward. So we're going to call that a wrap. If you have additional questions, please feel free to leave a comment or email me at victoria@victoriagriffin.com. I'm more than happy to talk to you about self-publishing, editing, all this good stuff. If you're interested in my editing services, I will drop a link in the comments. It's victoriagriffin.com/editing. And if you're interested in publishing services, cover design, interior formatting, website design, etc., again, link in the comments, Bluepin Pub, victoriagriffin.com/publishing-services. And of course, we will be talking about more fun stuff in the Self-Publishing Success series. Be sure to subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, and I'll keep making more. That's it for today. Thanks for hanging out with me, and I'll see y'all next time.